Everyone hates spoilers, right? I mean, it makes sense. Why bother experiencing the story when you know what's going to happen? Not knowing is half the fun. Just think about how angry people get when you spoil things for them. So why is the Golden Age arc of Berserk a thing? Let me rephrase. Berserk is a crazy story filled with blood and guts, and a whole assortment of different twists and turns that we have to endure simply by gritting our teeth and holding on for dear life. But by far the most infamous twist of all is the Eclipse. This event is the sort of thing that makes the Red Wedding look like a tea party where a few of the guests were feeling a little under the weather. Except, unless you watched the film trilogy first, you knew this was coming. Both the manga and the anime from the 90s start their stories in the future after the events of the Eclipse. The manga has the Black Swordsman Arc, where Guts spends his time murdering as many apostles as possible, and the anime has Episode 1, which serves the same purpose, if only in less detail. And while we don't get anything specific, we do get a pretty good idea of how much Guts hates Griffith.
Griffith!
We know something went down between them. So when we have our flashback arc and things start looking good for the Band of the Hawk, we have to remind ourselves, it's probably not going to end well. Where are all these characters in the future? Which begs the question, why is Berserk presented this way? Would Berserk be better without any knowledge of the Eclipse whatsoever? For example, if your first experience of Berserk was the film trilogy, which skips the first arc of the manga? Or is it better to have it completely spoiled? Say a friend warned you about the Eclipse beforehand. Or is the Berserk manga perfect the way it is, having the knowledge that something bad is coming, but not knowing exactly what? Well, let's find out. To give you some context, I think it's wise to tell you how I first read Berserk. Now, I won't lie, I only got into Berserk relatively recently, and it was mainly thanks to the Dark Souls games. A friend of mine had seen the 90s anime a while ago, and had enjoyed it, but warned me it was a bit intense. While reading through the Golden Age arc and the events leading up to the Eclipse, I knew something bad was going to happen. I knew that an eclipse was a very prominent image in Berserk thanks to its influences on Dark Souls. I knew that Griffith would do something awful, and I knew none of the characters except Guts were around in the first arc. Needless to say, the Eclipse shook me to my very core. What I'm getting at is that I had a little knowledge of something bad coming for our characters. In a way, the story spoiled itself, but it still took me by surprise. And I put it to you that Berserk wouldn't be nearly as good without this little semi-spoiler section. So what if you hadn't read the manga, or saw the original anime, but instead went for the films, or even picked up the manga or anime from the start of the Golden Age arc? The advantage, I suppose, is that the Eclipse would be a complete surprise. But there are a few problems. I've heard many people say that they thought Berserk was a straightforward medieval story right up until the Eclipse itself. Of course, the audience will happily believe anything as long as it makes sense within the world. Dragons in Game of Thrones? No problem. Dragons in the King's Speech? Small problem. In the Golden Age arc, we are given little things just to remind us about this. The Baelit's Eye, Zod, and of course the Skull Knight. Now, the movies did give us these, but to many that never read the manga or skipped the first section, these supernatural themes can be quite unexpected, as they are not the focus of the story until much later. So what if the story was completely spoiled? Well, someone spoiled it for you. You should probably distance yourself from them. But in all seriousness, you are likely to lose some of the shock value. But what is the difference between having a friend tell you all the plot points and the show or story itself giving some of the plot away? Well, if it's done correctly, the show will have a reason to give you this spoiler. It will be part of the journey. At the end of the day, it's very hard to define if a story is worse with or without spoilers, but what I think I can do is show why Berserk works so well exactly the way it's written. Having this pseudo-spoiler section before the jump back in time gives the Golden Age arc very important properties that you simply don't get if you omit these opening chapters. If you are unaware of Berserk's reputation, you might make the mistake of thinking it will all end well for our lovable Band of the Hawk. But it doesn't. Having this pseudo-spoiler section sets the tone for the show right away. Bad stuff happens in Berserk. This is something I've spoken about before, but one of the strongest aspects of Berserk as a story is its incredible atmosphere. The tone that is set in place by the opening chapters only emphasizes this. If it wasn't for the opening section, the Eclipse might even be too much of a plot twist, and be seen as coming out of left field, shocking the audience into disbelief. As I've said earlier, this glimpse into what is to come lets us know that monsters and fairies exist in this world. Without them, you could be forgiven for thinking Berserk was strictly medieval. In fact, it's not just the world that is being built, but the characters too. Guts on the surface is, well, it's very easy to see Guts as just some simple killing machine. And thanks to the Golden Age arc, we know better, as Guts has some of the best character development I've ever seen. Now, while it might be fair to say there would be more suspense if you didn't see the Black Swordsman arc, I think there's a little more to it. Firstly, none of the Band of the Hawk feature in the opening chapters, leading us to constantly question why. Did they survive? One of the biggest problems of long flashback sequences and prequels is that there is never really any reason to get invested. We see our characters at the start of the show, so we know they'll survive any flashback. But the bigger question is still Guts. Some shows have a main character that, while they fail from time to time, they will get through their troubles and the story will have a happy ending. Others buck the trend and kill off their main character to illustrate that no one is safe in that world. Both can be effective, but Berserk has a slightly different approach. It's not whether or not Guts will survive his battle with the monsters he meets, but rather what will be left of him when he walks away. I mean that both physically and emotionally. There is never any doubt in my mind that Guts will kill the monsters, but he's probably going to lose something in the process. From his scarred body to his missing limb and eye, from his violence and anger to his deep emotional trauma, Guts is not how or who he once was. Seeing a glimpse of where he will end up gives us a key insight again into the relevance of the coming events. With this dreadful atmosphere of coming doom, it really gives the Band of the Hawk's journey a sort of ticking clock feel. Things might be looking up for them now, but it cannot, will not, and does not last. But all that being said, there is one reason above the others that really causes these opening chapters to click, and in my opinion, makes them so vital to the story of Berserk as a whole. Berserk has many important themes, from camaraderie and courage to lessons about the lengths that humans will go to achieve their dreams. Berserk is not a simple story, but everything is merely playing on the stage of a much greater message, that of fate and causality. We see a similar effect when we look at prophecies and stories. They can make your plot flat and uninteresting if they are too obvious or detailed, but if used right, it can actually shape how the audience views the story. Guts has many names, but perhaps the most fitting is the Struggler, given to him by the Skull Knight. Guts' life is fighting monsters far greater and stronger than he is, but against all odds he succeeds, and much of Berserk revolves around the idea of struggling against forces beyond your control. The Band of the Hawk fight to obtain fame and riches, but struggle because of their low birth. The kingdom's nobles don't want to see commoners within the peerage of Midland. Casca must struggle against society every day due to her sex and race. Even Griffith struggles. He wants so desperately to be king, he must stand on the corpses of both enemies and friends to get there. All of the characters of Berserk are fighting in some way against fate, against the flow of causality, and this is why the opening chapters are so perfectly placed. By giving us a glimpse of what is to come, we will start to struggle as well. We don't want this terrible event to come. We don't want to see these terrible things happen. But it's going to happen. It's fate. Just like our characters, we fight against this fate. We will our characters to succeed in spite of knowing that this terrible event is coming. This idea of fate being out of our control, hanging over us all, is exactly the story Berserk tells so well. In all honesty, you don't need to see the opening arc or episode to enjoy Berserk. and there are plenty of people who have said that they liked not knowing it was coming. But you don't lose anything by seeing that opening. Instead, you add to the overall structure and message of the story. Sometimes telling your story out of order gives it that edge you need. Film directors like Quentin Tarantino have been doing it for years. Of course, you shouldn't just write a story and shuffle the scenes together like a pack of playing cards, but if you have a good reason for it, it can elevate your story in an incredible way, giving the readers a sense of impending doom that they simply wouldn't have otherwise. The most important thing is the reason behind the order of the story. Does it serve a greater purpose than, it's cool to tell a story out of order? Berserk gives us these opening chapters that, while interesting and entertaining in their own right, serve to give us that feeling of fate moving the story forward further and further out of our hands. These opening chapters help to establish the tone of Berserk, which is so vital to conveying both the characters and the atmosphere. They also help to build the world around our characters, establishing the possibilities that the world can explore. Monsters, fairies, and weird things. These opening chapters, contrary to what you might imagine, actually add suspense. You know Guts makes it, but not in one piece. It encourages you to read on, to find out what happened to the poor man. But most importantly, this arc shows us that fate cannot be beaten. Just like prophecies in your stories, spoilers can give away too much. However, if used well, they can add to your story in the most interesting of ways. Thank you for watching my second video on Berserk. If you missed the first one, there should be a link coming on screen about now. Consider subscribing, like or dislike as you please, and I will see you next time.